Just on the issues of poverty and inequality that you were saying NESC were looking into, I just want to put it to you that almost everything has changed since some of those reports were done, and that there needs, again, I'm afraid, needs to be a sort of an emergency response to the shocking levels of poverty that are now becoming apparent. The Bernardo's report today is really shocking. The numbers of people accessing food banks have doubled to 1 in 10 in the population. The numbers who have difficulty putting food on the table for their family is now 1 in 5. Now, this is in one of the richest countries in the world. We've a report yesterday about food inflation gone up 16% in 12 weeks running up to the middle of January, right? So people are being driven as we speak into poverty. And I think there has to be some awareness. We did predict this, I hate to say, at the budget, that the budget increases in social welfare and wages, pensions and so on, would leave people in a worse situation and more people driven into poverty. It is now happening, Taoiseach, and I believe there has to be a response. And I would put it to you, we need an emergency budget. We cannot have tens of thousands of people, and particularly vulnerable people and children, with not enough food to eat. Turning off the heating because they can't afford it. We can't have that. And it's particularly nauseating, if you like, that similar in a few weeks ago we had a report about the number of people who have more than 4 million in personal wealth has doubled in the country. Right? We have to do something about this inequality, and there needs to be an emergency response. We need an emergency budget, Taoiseach, and we need further emergency measures on the cost of living crisis.
In relation to the first matter raised, I think it is important, and it wasn't acknowledged in the questions, that poverty had been trending downwards in Ireland for a number of years, as had income inequality. And inequality in Ireland, as judged by the Gini coefficient, we're one of the few countries that hasn't seen inequality increase in recent years, and I think it's important that should be acknowledged, and that is largely down to the policies pursued by government in recent years. But the cost of living crisis does change things, and it has caused a huge setback, and I acknowledge that a lot of people, a lot of families are really struggling to make ends meet, to pay for very basic things, whether it's energy or fuel or food. We are taking a lot of actions. There are wage increases. The increase in the national minimum wage, 7.8%, just kicked in the last few weeks, is in line with inflation, and we are now likely to see inflation of less than 7.8% this year. It mightn't have been in line with inflation last year, but if you take inflation over a 3, 5 or 10-year period, the national minimum wage has increased ahead of the rate of inflation and ahead of the cost of living. We have the public sector pay deal as well. We've increases coming through employment regulation orders, and across the private sector pay increases are happening as well. We have pension and welfare increases, again just kicked in the last few weeks, an extra €12 a week, and then more targeted measures like the extension of the fuel allowance to tens of thousands of more people. We've income tax reductions, including the rent credit, which I know will be welcomed by a lot of renters. We're taking action on the social wage, reducing the cost of public transport, school transport, childcare, college fees, free school books. All of these things make a big difference. And there is the energy credit too. And that, another €200 will be knocked off people's bills in March. And research by ESRI and other bodies has shown that for a lot of people, it does largely or fully insulate them from the cost of living. But I absolutely acknowledge that's not the case for everyone. And certainly when it comes to deciding what we do in the March, April, May period, we'll have regard to the fact that we need to target those who are suffering the most. To be very frank, I don't think price controls are a good idea. They have been done in the past in Ireland. They didn't work very well. And while the government can cap what retailers can charge for a certain product, they can't cap what the retailer has to pay to get the product. And where price controls and price caps have been introduced, it often leads to shortages. So, for example, you might find that if you introduced a price cap of, let's say, 120 cents for petrol or diesel, that you'll just have no petrol or diesel because there's no margin there for the retailer. And that's often one of the problems with price controls. Another problem with them, and we saw this play out in the UK, where they had energy price caps, the government just had to keep increasing the caps because the wholesale cost of energy kept going up. So I don't think it's the panacea that some deputies have suggested. I accept Deputy O'Donnell's point, by the way, in relation to domestic violence leave in Northern Ireland, but I don't think you can see things in isolation. Take sick pay, for example, in Northern Ireland. What we offer people in terms of sick pay is more in a day than you get in a week in Northern Ireland, and you have to take it into account in the round. The same applies to the minimum wage, for example.